afternoon, everyone. We've just opened the webinar, so we'll just give it a moment as we allow the floodgates to open and everyone starts to trickle in. I hope you're doing well on this Wednesday morning, afternoon, evening, night, wherever you are calling in from. And welcome to the third OECD Washington Center DC Global Shapers Future of Work Interactive Dialogue Series event. Today's session is on improving job quality and equity for all, implications of work automation and augmentation. My name is Denny Ryan from the OECD Washington Center, and it's great to have you here today with such an esteemed panel. Our goal with these webinars is to discuss the policies, ideas, and actions that are shaping the future of work. Throughout this series, we will discuss and have discussed reskilling, automation, entrepreneurship, education, and much more. For the first time ever, the OECD is putting young people at the heart of this discussion with our recently launched Youth Consultation, which aims to provide tools to better understand these issues and contribute to the conversation. So if you are between 15 and 30, whatever your current situation or background may be, we would love it if you would share your thoughts with us by taking part in our survey. Your opinions and ideas will help shape the OECD's advice to policymakers. This series also supports the World Economic Forum's Davos Lab initiative, topic area of economy. And for those of you who are joining us from the AI Future Lab, welcome. As you know, this session is also dovetailing into the lab's Future of Work Davos dialogue. I want to say a big thank you to the DC Global Shapers for their enormous contribution to this series and for being such a brilliant partner. And we're looking forward to continuing our work with them. We hope you enjoy today's event and do please check out our final webinar, which will be on April 14. With that said, it gives me great pleasure to hand over to my partner in crime, Shaylin, Senior Analyst, Education Labor at New America and Washington, DC Global Shaper. Shaylin, thank you so much for moderating today's session. I now hand over to you.
Thanks so much, Danny, for your kind words and for your partnership. And welcome, everybody. Many thanks for joining us. I see lots of familiar names in the audience. We'd love to get to know you. Feel free to introduce yourself in the chat so we can get a sense of who's in the room. If you're on social media, let us know that you're out there. Live tweet, and you can tag our speakers in the OECD so we can follow up with you after the session. We've gathered here today to talk about improving job quality and equity as our world continues to navigate work automation and augmentation. Depending on your vantage point, the future of work could be an exciting opportunity or a dead horse that's been beaten more than enough, and a distraction even from the present state of the labor market and the challenges that it faces. But the picture is usually more complicated than that. First, we know now through empirical research, including recent research that's been done in this past year, that automation is not going to take all of our jobs anytime soon. A plug for a Slate piece by my colleague Kevin Carey here at New America, which I'll drop in the chat. Rob Atkinson of ITIF and others across the political and policy spectrum have written about this, including our colleague Liz Reynolds from MIT, who will be joining the White House tomorrow, hence why she wasn't able to join us today. You may have seen her on a previous copy of the program. But that doesn't mean that we shouldn't be talking about building a better, higher quality future of work. It doesn't mean that's a moot point. Most of us and our children spend our early years preparing to work for lifelong learning to keep us in our work, and then spend most of our waking hours working. Work is embedded in who we are. Look at Anglo-Saxon last names: Cook, Miller, Baker, Smith. They're all trades in Indo-parts of some of their affiliations. First up, we have Jeremias Adams-Prassel, a professor of law at the University of Oxford. Jeremias' expertise focuses on technology, law, innovation policy, and the future of work in the EU and beyond. He's the author of many books and reports along these lines and has been a resource for the OECD, the ILO, and many other groups. He serves on the World Economic Forum's Global Futures Council for Work, Wages, and Job Creation, which is how I first met Jeremias. He's on Twitter at Jeremias-Prassel. And then we have Maureen Conway, Vice President and Executive Director of the Economic Opportunities Program at the Aspen Institute, a think tank in DC. If you care about job quality, Maureen and her program are a must know. I draw on her work and my own every week, every day. Maureen's work focuses on expanding economic opportunity and opportunity to quality work, business creation, and economic stability. She's been a leading figure in this space since 1999 when she founded the EOP, and she's frequently called upon by the media and the national policymaking scene as a resource on job quality. She's also worked internationally with the OECD and the US Peace Corps. Next up, my friend and colleague, Leticia Gasca. Leti is a future of work insights manager at Fathom AI. Leti brings this sort of industry lens. Fathom AI helps firms make informed choices about the impact of emerging technologies on their workforce. Leti is a prolific entrepreneur, having created multiple social enterprises, including the Skills Agility Lab and the Global Failure Index. She's a WEF Global Shaper as well, and Leti and I have both waved the Equity and Future of Work flag at the Davos meeting, although in separate years. And of course, we have the venerable Audrey Plonk, who's head of the Digital Economy Policy Program at the OECD. Audrey was previously at Intel and has held a number of positions with Booz Allen Hamilton and other places. I've also drawn heavily on Audrey and her team's work over the years, so thanks very much to you, Audrey, for joining us. So there you have it, folks. We have a great lineup. We'll start our discussion today with Audrey setting the scene and sharing a bit about her work at the OECD. Then each of our three panelists will comment on job quality, equity, and automation augmentation for 5 minutes each or so, and then we'll dive into the discussion piece. Please add your questions in the chat at any time. You can also tweet at me in case you're joining via live stream, and I will incorporate your questions into our Q&A segment. This panel is being recorded. It'll be made available on the OECD YouTube channel sometime tomorrow, so feel free to share it with colleagues. And panel, thanks again so much for joining us. Audrey, please take it away.
Thank you so much. It's really a pleasure to be with you here today. I'm just getting my slides working properly, and we will get started. My name is Audrey Plonk. As was said, I'm the head of the Division for Digital Economy Policy at the OECD. I'm going to spend a minute or two telling you what that means and what we're up to when we look at the digital transformation and technologies like artificial intelligence. I'm going to just try to get this to go in presentation mode. It doesn't want to. I'll just keep going. So like I said, I'm going to start with the work we are doing at the OECD in my division and talk a little bit about the key challenges that governments face with AI policy implementation, and then talk a little bit about what we see as next steps, particularly in the wake of COVID-19, with regard to public policy on the topics. What is the digital economy at the OECD? So we operate by committees, and so we have an overarching committee that we call affectionately CDEP. And underneath CDEP, we have 4 working parties that specialize in different areas of the digital economy. So you can see there, we have a working party, they're sort of like subcommittees. They're focused on communications infrastructure and services. So that's where we do all our analysis on telecommunications, broadband, convergence, 5G, Internet of Things, sort of everything that is policy and measurement with regard to what we call connectivity more modernly today. Then we have a working party on data governance and privacy, which many people may be familiar with. The OECD is well known for its 1980 privacy guidelines that are foundational to pretty much every privacy law on the planet. That working party looks at both privacy, but broader issues of data governance, access to data, sharing of data, and of course, how data impacts technologies like AI. We have a working party on security in the digital economy. You might say, what is the security in the digital economy? We don't call it cybersecurity, but it sort of is cybersecurity in a lot of ways. We look a lot at digital security risk management. We look at critical activities, so critical infrastructure activities that are critical to an economy, and the cybersecurity or digital security aspects of those activities. And last but not least, we have a working party focused specifically on measurement. In this part of our work, we do annual surveys. This is sort of the classic OECD. This is how we gather data from countries. We develop indicators. We work on statistical standards and economic analysis. And that working group really cuts across all of our policy areas. And then up at the committee level, I'll say we have a very, very active committee with its own extremely substantive program of work, in addition to being the sort of governance mechanism for all of these working parties. And I guess a few topics that they are focused on, which I think are of interest to this group. The first is artificial intelligence. We're going to talk about that a lot today. We have work on online platforms. So specifically focused on terrorism and violent extremist content online right now, but we've done previous analytical work on the economics of the platforms, the social and sort of wellness dimensions of the platform economy. And then, of course, digital transformation, which was a theme of this event. We have a lot of work that attempts to look at how countries are transforming digitally, how they're diffusing technologies throughout their economies, throughout government, throughout firms, large and small, large enterprises, small enterprises, and then all the way down to the individual level. We have a really, really cool interactive toolkit called the Going Digital Toolkit, which I would highly recommend, where you can go look at countries' digital transformations centered around a framework of 7 different policy dimensions. Things like access, things like trust, jobs and skills, and many of the topics that I'm sure we'll touch on here today. So that's, broadly speaking, what we do here at the OECD. I already mentioned the privacy guidelines, so I won't bore you with them again, but we have a series of flagship instruments, and what that means in OECD speak is these are non-binding commitments, political commitments by countries when they adopt a legal instrument at the OECD. So the privacy guidelines is an example. More recently, our council adopted recommendations on artificial intelligence back in May of 2019. Those were subsequently integrated into G20 AI principles as well. We have recommendations on digital security and how to manage risk in digital security risk across private and public sector. We also have, hot off the press, a revision to our broadband recommendation on how to advance connectivity, which is really important for people, particularly in the COVID situation where everybody is demanding much more from their internet connection. So that's just a few of our more high-profile instruments. There's many, many more. I mentioned already our Going Digital project, the toolkit, but you can see there to the right, that pretty color fan. Those are the policy dimensions, and we structure a lot of our work around these dimensions when we think about countries transforming and advancing in the digital economy. That program comes with a roadmap of things we're trying to measure. And then this year and next year, we have a special focus on data governance for growth and well-being, where we're looking at access and sharing of data. We're looking at cross-border data flows. We're looking at new ways to measure and try to quantify value of data. And we're looking at how firms and companies use data to innovate. This is all relevant to AI. Every biennium, we have a flagship publication called the Digital Economy Outlook. I highly recommend it. It's very big, so it's not the sort of thing you probably want to read cover to cover, but it's a wealth of statistics and analysis on digital transformation across OECD countries and beyond. And then we do reviews of countries where we go in depth to look at a country's particular policy, regulatory, economic structure with regard to both digital transformation on the one hand, using, again, that Going Digital framework, as well as telecommunications and broadcasting reviews as well. There's a few examples of that. Most recently, we did a comprehensive review of Brazil on telecommunications connectivity and their going digital transformation. We've also done Colombia, we've done Latvia, we've done Mexico. We've done Southeast Asia going digital reviews. We've also done reviews kind of regionally. So those can be interesting, but it certainly provides us sort of the ability to go really deep and work with a country to understand their unique needs and their unique situation. So I mentioned the toolkit already. The picture on the left here is what you'll see if you go to the site, and you can, the bars across the circle are indicators, and you can click on them. You can manipulate the data in all different kinds of ways. You can look by country, you can choose countries, you can put indicators together. You can look, take trust and access and see if there's a correlation there. We also have policy notes ongoing where we take, we've worked across the OECD with many different committees that focus on different sectors of the economy and looked at their digital transformations and turned that into sort of light policy recommendations of what countries can think about with regard to making policy about digital transformation. In the middle there, you see the OECD AI Policy Observatory. It's what you also see in my tag of my slides. It's a platform that we created and launched about a year ago, a little bit more, just before all of the COVID lockdowns happened. It was our last event at the OECD. It is basically, it's a data source for academics, for policymakers, for researchers, for anyone who's interested in what's happening with artificial intelligence at the international level. So it takes the OECD AI principles and it tries to put data behind it. So we have surveys from countries, we look at policy initiatives across more than 60 countries around the world. We also have live data from partners where we're looking at trends in patents, we're looking at trends in research, we're looking at trends in jobs and skills. And then finally, and certainly not least, we have the broadband portal, the OECD broadband portal, where we look at, we measure different ways of connectivity across OECD member countries. We look at individuals, we look at firms, we look at households, we look at fixed and mobile broadband connections, and we update that data twice a year. On the observatory itself is constantly changing. There's something new there almost every day, so you gotta visit it often. A few key challenges just to get the discussion started, and these draw from the Oecd Ai Recommendation. The recommendation itself has a focus on values-based principles and then a focus on how to help governments advance artificial intelligence. So I think it's probably no secret that investment in AI R&D is extremely important. It features prominently and heavily in countries' AI strategies, and we're seeing more and more AI strategies come at the national level. We see a need for digital infrastructure for AI, obviously computing resources, but also data resources, connectivity resources. International cooperation, obviously that's one of the reasons the OECD is here, but also many other international organizations that we work with that look at AI and are looking to advance ethical AI, human-centered AI. Some of the principles that are embodied in the Oecd AI Principles. Obviously, AI skills and the future of work, critically important. We have a huge project at the OECD, cross-cutting between our division and directorate and the Employment, Labor and Statistics Directorate, the Health Directorate, looking at the future of work in cooperation with specifically with Germany, but obviously with other countries involved in that as well. And then obviously we want to enable AI to grow and to grow responsibly and in a trustworthy way. And so we know from the 60 years that the OECD has been doing this, that policy environments play a critical role in enabling all sorts of advances in technology. And so that's a key area here for AI. Just a couple observations with regard to COVID and challenges and opportunities with AI. So data availability, obviously, we will probably talk about that. The system's probably only as good as the data you're putting in it, and so we have new and complex challenges with regard to accessing data for training algorithms, for machine learning. And we have significant work underway, forthcoming, recommending principles and practices for gaining and getting better access to data while also protecting privacy and security. With inputs and expertise here, we've seen that with, as we've responded to COVID and gone from not knowing anything about the disease to needing to respond and ultimately find a vaccine, we see the need to have a growth in expertise in skills with regard to artificial intelligence and how to apply machine learning and the opportunities there to real world problems like COVID. I think it's probably also obvious to everyone that the data sensitivity, particularly when we look at things like track and trace apps, and we're doing some work to analyze what's worked and what hasn't worked there. But obviously handling of personal information and how that is used in artificial intelligence is extremely important. I mentioned international cooperation. We see the challenges of getting vaccines across borders. We're here in France struggling with that a little bit ourselves right now. And then when we think about information and sort of general information on the internet, the abundance of false and misleading information that we've seen about the virus, we wrote a policy note about that. It's probably been 9 months now, where we sort of tracked what was happening with mis and disinformation online about COVID. Many others have looked and done great work on this. So these are some challenges, policy challenges, and maybe less technical challenges, but as we think about the future of AI that our countries think about. But it also helps us make our policy priorities clearer. So, we, as I mentioned before, for data, better access and sharing, but also structures and frameworks to do that safely, responsibly, privacy protecting and security protecting. How we grow the future workforce, including investing in research and development, but training and skills and labor development, privacy preserving solutions for data, for handling sensitive data, and then mechanisms for global cooperation. We have a few of those already, but really using the international community to advance the way we want the technology to look in the future is critically important. And then work on how we tackle the sort of societal problems of today with regard to mis and disinformation and how that shapes our society around probably everything we do, but certainly when you start to think about the externalities created by something like COVID and vaccines. So with that, thank you so much. I could go on, but I won't. I look forward to the discussion, and I'll turn it back to the chair. Thank you.
Brilliant, Audrey. Many thanks for the overview. Next, we'll hear from Maureen Conway.
Great, thank you. Thank you so much, Shaylin, for the introductions, and thanks to the OECD for hosting this conversation. When Shaylin reached out to ask if I would join a panel to talk about improving job quality and equity, I said, of course, because that is what we do at the Economic Opportunities Program all day, every day. And that is a huge concern of ours, is how to improve job quality and equity in our labor markets. So I'm really thrilled to be here, and I'm delighted you're hosting this conversation. I just want to say a word about the Economic Opportunities Program and what we do, just to sort of say a little bit about how I come to this conversation. So first of all, the Economic Opportunities Program at the Aspen Institute, we look at sort of policy strategies and ideas to help low and moderate income people in the United States try to connect to opportunity in sort of our changing economy. So we are very US focused, actually. So I just feel I need to say that on an OECD thing. My comments are pretty much framed by US policies and US context. We are also very focused on practice. So what we do in the Economic Opportunities Program is we spend a lot of time with organizations that are actually trying to implement policies and trying to implement strategies that can connect people to economic opportunities. So whether that's job training or small business development or microenterprise development, we're really trying to look at those kinds of initiatives in context. So in particular cities and towns across the country, how do they work? Who do they work with? What industry sectors do they focus on, et cetera? Really kind of getting into the weeds of how do you do the work. So I just say that we do evaluation work. We do a lot of work with sort of leadership programs. We develop tools. On the tools thing, we have a whole job quality library of tools. So I'll drop a link to that into the chat later. So we do a lot of this very sort of granular work. And just the third thing I want to note is that for me personally, and my work has really been looking on the connecting people to work side of this. It's really provided me the opportunity to spend a lot of time talking to workers about why they're coming to a particular program, what their experiences of work have been, and what they're hoping to get out of the program, to talk to companies that work with those programs about what their labor force challenges are and why they're working with a particular program, and to talk with the people who run these kinds of initiatives about sort of how policy does or doesn't support what they're doing, and sort of what are the range of issues that they're dealing with. And we have a set of leaders that we've been working with, our job quality fellows, that come from sort of workforce development, economic development, local government. A couple of them come from business, come from labor and worker organizations. So from a wide variety of things, really all looking at what are their levers to improve job quality. So that's kind of the set of work that informs my perspective. And I'll just say, so, and the first thing I wanted to note about job quality is, and one of the reasons I'm so happy we're having this conversation, it is indeed a very huge problem. So just prior to the pandemic, scholars at Brookings released a report finding 53 million workers ages 18 to 64, so that's 44% of all workers, were earning barely enough to live on, right? So this is a huge number. Some people like to say, well, you know, but they're not all trying to like support a family or this or that. I've looked at earned income tax credit recipients. So earned income tax credit recipients are by definition heads of households. And roughly, you know, if you look at sort of the numbers of people that get it, according and what the IRS has to say about the coverage, it's about 1 in 5 workers are eligible for the earned income tax credit. So again, this is a huge number of workers, and it's got clear implications for households, for child poverty, for a variety of social challenges. So job quality is a big problem. I also want to say about job quality, it's not just wages. So job quality is kind of complicated. In the United States, job quality also includes very important benefits like health insurance, disability insurance, unemployment insurance, retirement. These benefits are critical to helping people have a stable life, but they're also expensive. The recent fight on AB5 in California shows just how much companies will invest in avoiding the expense of providing employment benefits. This is a big piece of job quality, and we can't lose sight of that. And it's not just wages and benefits as well, because it's also a lot of the intangibles of work. Shaylin talked at the beginning about how much of a role work plays in our lives, sort of and these are things we would hear about from in our interviews and focus groups with workers all the time, the enjoying colleagues, feeling good about one's work and that one's work is valued, having a boss that treats you fairly and decently. All of these things are really important elements of job quality as well. Gallup did a really very interesting survey trying to put together a framework, interviewing people about elements of what they think makes a quality job, and these were important parts of their framework as well from that survey. But notably from that survey, only 40% of people think that they have a good job. So again, job quality, it's complicated and it's a big problem. And equity is a huge part of it. We've seen that low quality jobs are disproportionately held by women, people of color, occupational segregation. If you look at occupational segregation, the more female an occupation is, and the more likely it is to be held by women of color, chances are the worse the pay and benefits are. So equity is a huge and very, very interconnected part of the job quality question. So And I think this job quality question just has huge implications for our deeply divided society. Work is a central part of our lives, but given sort of the divides of our labor market, our experience of work is very, very different. And it really, I think, has a huge implication for how we are able to come together as a society. These divides run along the lines of race, class, gender, ethnicity, geography, these fault lines that are in our society. So, and I think addressing our social and political divides will require addressing our economic divides, and addressing our economic divides requires addressing job quality. Back on my job quality theme. But I know I'm only supposed to talk for 5 minutes, so I will wrap with just a note about technology, because this conversation was framed about job quality and technology. Certainly technology is creating opportunities to redesign work, to maybe hopefully eliminate boring, dirty, dangerous tasks. And certainly technology is changing, will contribute or creates opportunities to change the nature of work. But I am struggling myself to not say technology is changing work, because I think we should not say technology is changing work, because that is anthropomorphizing technology. And technology is not changing work, people change work. People do work, people change work, people control work. In our last technological revolution, the Industrial Revolution, work did become awful. But it wasn't technology that decided to force workers into cramped, miserable, unsafe factories. It wasn't technology that enslaved Africans and forced them to mass produce cotton to feed those miserable factories. And it's not technology that chose to end slavery and child labor, or to require safe working conditions and fair compensation, or to build public schools that allowed millions of people to get a decent education, admittedly with some equity issues there as well. Technology didn't do those things. People did those things. And so that's the good news, right? Because technology is not going to kill our labor market. We can make it good. We can make it what we want it to be. Business practices, policy choices, the norms, the expectations we bring to our economic decisions around work, they make all the difference. And so we can build a great future of work where we harness the best of technology and drive that forward. And so I will stop there and look forward to further discussion. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Maureen. Next up, we'll hear from Leticia Gasca.
Thanks, Charlene. Thank you for hosting this conversation. And I think that I would like to present a vision of what is happening in the field. At Fathom, I have the opportunity to work with governments and multinational organizations that are looking for an evidence-based approach to the big decisions around the so-called future of work, that I just want to point out that it's not the future. Probably we should stop saying future of work, because this is happening now. Every day I hear C-level executives discussing how AI and robotics are going to impact their people, which jobs will be more productive or even safer thanks to technology, which that is the portion of augmentation we're discussing. Also, of course, what tasks will be automated, what is the most efficient way to retrain people at risk of being automated, and what specific skills will be needed. And I think that my most pleasant surprise has been to see what a truly responsible employer can achieve. I have seen how in a few months you can transform the professional pathway of an accountant who was about to be automated into a career into cybersecurity space. And I would like to take these minutes to share some reflections from I would say, 3 sources. The first, this field work. The second one, Fathom's most recent report on this topic, published just 2 weeks ago in partnership with BCG. I will share the link in the chat after my intervention. And third, also my work with the Global Shapers community. I co-chaired the Education and Employment Steering Committee, and this experience has really allowed me to understand the challenges and concerns that global youth faces around the evolution of work. And as the first reflection, I want to highlight that sometimes when we talk about the evolution of work, we talk about the number of jobs that will be created or that will be destroyed. But I think that this is just an artificially simple metric to measure the deep impact of digitization. For instance, eliminating 10 million jobs and creating 10 million new jobs would appear to have no impact. However, doing so represents a massive economic disruption for a country, not to mention for the millions of individuals whose jobs are at stake. To make sense of these shifts, for this report I will share in a couple of minutes, we built a very robust economic model to describe potential scenarios of the evolution of work in Australia, UK, and the US in the lens of the pandemic and also emerging technologies in the workplace. And we found that, of course, yes, there are some sectors at risk. For instance, in the US, jobs in administrative support. But we also found, and this was very interesting, that in the US, we will likely experience a labor shortfall in 10 years in fields such as computer science, mathematics, architecture, engineering. This means that up to 6.9 million jobs could be left unfilled by 2030. Another relevant insight is around the potential of technology to create jobs. We found that in the United States, for every 6 jobs that will be impacted by automation or augmentation, 1 additional job will be created to implement, use, or run these emerging technologies. And also for those roles that involve little or no automation, but that require human interaction and compassion, such as healthcare, social services, some teaching occupations, the demand for skills will grow. And finally, building on Audrey's awesome presentation, I want to share 4 key ideas for policymakers. The first one is plan for the future workforce. We have found that it's very valuable when governments have a central workforce strategy and policy unit in place. This really helps policymakers understand the trends on workforce supply and demand, identify gaps, and plan for the future. The second idea is rethink education, upskilling, and reskilling. Education systems must be designed for lifelong learning. The focus shouldn't be on providing just traditional degree programs. Governments should also help people obtain micro-credentials and certifications. And also we need to refocus on the so-called meta skills, such as logical thinking, critical thinking, creativity. The third idea I want to propose is to build career and employment platforms. This really will help citizens assess their skills, identify potential employment pathways, and close capability gaps through skilling and reskilling. And I really can't emphasize how important it is to build these evidence-based platforms to support citizens in individual decision-making. We have the data, we just need to make it actionable at the individual level. And the fourth idea, and the final one, is to update social safety nets. I think this is essential to achieve equity. Policymakers need to focus on providing upskilling and reskilling opportunities for all workers, including those who are in transition, those who are working part-time, or who are unable to adapt to the digital economy for different reasons. And I think that, yeah, proposing 4 ideas sounds very easy, but as we all know, the challenge is really big. And to be successful, all stakeholders must collaborate. Governments, private sector, and of course, academia should work together to develop evidence-based solutions. Thank you.
Brilliant, Letty. Thanks so much. Next, we'll hear from Jeremias.
Thank you very much indeed, Shalene, and it's really nice to follow on from Audrey and Maureen and Letty and their really interesting and stimulating contributions. So I'm a lawyer, so you might ask yourself, what on earth am I doing here? But really my work has been focusing very much on the story of automation and jobs, but not from the traditional perspective of job loss, right? As Letty was already talking, these traditional stories of robots coming for your jobs are simply not borne out in the evidence. And again, the OECD was actually at the forefront of providing data and information to that extent. Now, what is happening, however, is that robots might not be coming for workers' jobs, but they're coming for the boss's jobs. They're actually coming for management functions. And one of the things that I find really interesting is that whilst, at first glance, many people might rejoice at the idea of their boss being replaced by automation, actually the reality is potentially a much starker one. And so whether we're looking at the gig economy, warehouses, or as it were, the traditional bottom of the labor market, right across the socioeconomic spectrum to factories and offices, professional service firms, what's happening is that traditional management functions are becoming either completely automated or at least augmented through artificial intelligence in their exercise. So whether it's applying to a job where your CVs are sifted automatically, or your video interview is just being scored for innovation potential by an algorithm, all the way through determining what your salary is, what your career progression is, right up to and including decisions who gets terminated, who gets sacked at the end of an employment relationship. All of these traditional management functions are starting to be augmented or indeed replaced by AI. And it's really important as well that, as Audrey pointed out, there's a really crucial COVID-19 link here, and we should also think about. Imagine, even 13 months ago, I think back, the last time I was at the OECD headquarters in Paris was in February, 13 months ago. And then if I'd sat there and said, we're all about to be asked to have video cameras in our living rooms and bedrooms, you would have had a revolution on your hands. It would have been unimaginable. And yet a year later, with the rise of remote working, with the rise of various surveillance, health-related technologies, also non-remote working places, we're suddenly in a world where the baseline has completely shifted. We're suddenly in a world where just about everything we do work-wise is now being recorded, whether it's through Microsoft Teams or various other collaboration softwares, whether it's through badges or other safety features in the workplace. And so I think one thing that's really crucial is that the baseline has shifted to an extent that algorithmic management was perhaps a nice, interesting niche topic or growth area a year ago. Now it's in just about every workplace across the socioeconomic spectrum. And so when it comes to that, then from a legal perspective, I think there's 2 points, perhaps 2 myths that it's really important for us to bust. The first myth is that technology is something that's happening to us, right? The sort of idea that there's some sort of path dependency, some technological determinism, that actually the rollout of AI has to happen in one particular way. That's simply not true. Think, for example, about using AI in a warehouse, right? In a good way, I could use it to increase productivity and health and safety by giving workers the fastest routes to the items they have to pick, by making sure they get proper rest breaks, by making sure that, they don't get to lift things that are too heavy. At the same time, the same technology could be deployed to ensure that workers do more and more work, that, I try to increase how much pressure there is on them to pick an extra 10% of items every day, that maybe if they're sort of sneaking behind a corner to have a little rest break, that it buzzes and goes off and pushes them to do harder work. Now, the crucial story here is that technology in and of itself can do both of those things. What shapes how we deploy it is legal regulation, is the kind of choices we make. I've been involved in future of work debates for quite a long time, and I agree with Letty's criticism that it's not just the future of work, it's the work now. But also related to that, I think, is we need to have a conversation about the futures of work. There's no one future of work. Our regulatory choices today will have a huge impact as to what's happening going forward. And those regulatory choices need to happen at the national level, but also, and this is where both the OECDs and also the World Economic Forum's work are so important, they are ultimately global technologies. And so a lot of these regulatory choices will need to happen and be taken at the global level. Now, talk about regulation, and lots of people will think, well, he's a lawyer. Obviously, that's what lawyers talk about and what lawyers are interested in. And isn't regulation going to stand in the way of innovation? Isn't regulation going to destroy all of this? And again, there, I think that's really important that we stand up to this myth that somehow there is a juxtaposition or a sort of irreconcilability between regulation on the one hand and innovation on the other. If anything, all the empirical evidence very clearly suggests that the opposite is true. What we need for genuine innovation, for genuine productivity and welfare-enhancing development of the technology is a level playing field. We need a set of basic rules that everybody applies. We need to avoid externalities, and we need to ensure that it's only on that level playing field that then genuinely beneficial innovation can happen. And again, that's where the role of international standard-setting bodies, particularly with fast-moving technologies like artificial intelligence, is so important. And that's why the work of the OECD, but also the work of bodies like the European Commission is so important in developing and setting out frameworks that, of course, will enable the growth of these technologies, but will also make sure, in a sense, that we get to have all the advantages and all the positive upsides of algorithmic management without necessarily falling for a lot of the traps and the downsides. I look forward to our discussion. Thank you again for having me.
Brilliant. Many thanks, Jeremiah, for the great overview. Folks, it's time for questions. Please feel free to drop yours in the chat. We've already had some come through. So panel, to kick off our dialogue here, I'll actually piggyback on Jeremiah's comments of multiple futures of work, one of which is for gig workers and freelancers. In reading all of your bios, we've all done some level of this in our own capacities. Gito Pudigano asks, how could job quality improve in an era where freelancers, generally underpaid, are becoming more and more present? And that's an open question to whoever would like to speak first. Maureen?
Sure. Well, I mean, that's a complicated question, because I think you sort of have to ask yourself, one, there's why are freelancers becoming more and more present, right? And sort of who's choosing for that? And I popped in because I mentioned the AB5 debate in California, right? And so, and I think this has been a big debate about gig work. Like, is it more flexible for people or is it more precarious for people? And I think it really, there's ways where professional educated people can choose independent and freelance work and have it be more flexible for them and meet their life needs. But I think for people who are struggling to sort of make a living in work, it can create sort of a very downward spiral by having atomized competition and not having a way that people can sort of work together. So how can that work be better? So there's a variety of different ways you could think about it, right? So that you can relitigate the classification issue, right? Or but you can also just think about other kinds of ways where people might be able to have facilitated collective action. So one of our job quality fellows that I mentioned is one of the founders of coworker.org, right? Where they're sort of using a technology platform to say, how can working people share information and, have a sort of common challenge lifted up and addressed, right? So what are some new ways of sort of workers kind of having collective voice so that they can really lift their challenges up and have them be addressed. So I think that aspect is important. And then there's sort of the broader aspect of, what is the role of an individual employer versus what is the role of the public sector, right? So if you're and again, I'm US based, right? But if everything is attached to a job, right? Your health insurance, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, that just makes that really hard for freelance to be a viable way to support yourself. So if the public sector takes on some of these larger insurance kinds of issues that we now attach to employment, it makes it easier for, I think, independent employment to be good employment where you can earn a decent living. So that's just a couple of thoughts. Others may have.
Could I perhaps just quickly chip in here on something Maureen said that I think is really important, which is another sort of myth about labour market regulation. And that is, I think it ties in very nicely with what Maureen has said. Flexibility and employment protection are not mutually inconsistent. This is a persistent myth we see out there. I've looked at every OECD labour market regulation system. Not in a single one of them is there mutual inconsistency between having employment protection and between having flexibility. So somehow this idea that workers' rights are sort of basic floor of protection is linked to working in an office, the boss breathing over your shoulder from 9 to 5. That's simply not true as a matter of law. It might be attractive as a matter of business choice, of course, but I think selling it as a sort of, well, the law forces you to choose either flexibility or protection, technically speaking, that's simply not true.
Brilliant, fantastic comments there. And it's interesting, the two other comments in our lineup here have to deal with both labor and education. Why don't we build on the labor trend here and go with a question from Sebastian, which is focused on AI management with respect to labor and how things can be protected on the labor side of things via collective bargaining. Sebastian is interested in wondering the panel's thoughts on how these contracts now need to have written protections against AI standards. So maybe Jeremiah, you could comment on that. So, I think the question is, thinking about our contract law and our collective bargaining agreements with unions, what's the current state of how those collective bargaining agreements are considering with respect to AI and management?
So I think one of the biggest challenges with regulating algorithmic management is the fact that lots of different sort of regulatory silos apply at the moment, right? So you can think of data protection dealing with certain issues. You can think of discrimination laws dealing with certain issues. You can think of sort of more traditional employment and labor rights dealing with certain issues. I actually think that collective bargaining provides a potentially very promising solution to a lot of the challenges in the near run, at the very least, because it's so flexible. Right. Again, as I mentioned, 30 months ago, we were at the OECD for the launch of the Global Deal, a sort of big emphasis the OECD now has on collective bargaining, social dialogue as a way of regulating the labor market. With something as fast moving and as sort of, exciting and quickly developing as artificial intelligence at work, I actually think the kind of flexible mechanisms of both management and labor to be able to talk to each other and negotiate individual solutions is a very, very promising solution. And it's a win-win situation. But something else that we sometimes forget is that the likes of Amazon, well, they will build their own recruitment algorithms, but the vast majority of businesses, particularly SMEs, will not have the capacity to actually build their own algorithms, so they'll have to buy them in off the shelf. And then usually, actually, you have to get some sort of consultancy to come in and help you actually implement those technologies in the workplace. Now, you could do that, or you could have some sort of works council who are experienced in your workplace, who actually know the structures in your workplace, and who would help you do that. And there's very good examples of this, for example, coming out of countries like Germany, where you end up having worker representatives who are specialized in the technology. And of course, what that gets you as an employer is a responsible deployment of the technology. It gets you the buy-in from the workforce as well, that they know, some of the creepier features have been turned off. And actually, the more useful features are deployed in a way that works particularly for your workplace. So I think there's a lot of potential for social dialogue, social partnership in regulating artificial intelligence in the workplace.
Brilliant. Many thanks, Jeremiah. Thoughts from others on the panel? Audrey, Letty, Maureen? Brilliant. Well, the second question in our queue has to... Oh, yes, Maureen, did you want to weigh in? The next question in our queue has to do with education, and it's a question that I'm especially... Audrey, would you like to weigh in on the prior question?
No, but I think Letty wanted to.
Sorry about that, Letty. Go ahead.
I was planning to mention something around education, so probably you can...
Brilliant. So the third question we have comes from Anna David, which is focused on all of your comments really around rapid reskilling and upskilling needs. What is the panel's thoughts, and Letty, please kick us off here, with respect to how we see traditional undergraduate education in the context of the reskilling conversation? Do we still see a place for traditional undergraduate education? How does that fit into our conversations on reskilling?
Very interesting. I think that there is, I don't want to say that in the future there will be no place for traditional education, let's say. I think that there will be place for multiple different ways of education. I hope that in the future there is nothing that we see as traditional, because there will be multiple learning paths, and we will be able to deeply understand how, for instance, thinking about equity, how specific groups will be impacted by technology and the specific types of training that could support these individuals. And just to clarify, I think that there is nothing around a person's gender, ethnicity, or age that makes them more vulnerable to technology than others. It's all about the industries and the jobs that people work in, and often what job and educational opportunities are available to them. So I think that we need, in the future, yes, to rethink education, and also to embrace data, to be able to think in advance, and probably try to get ready for how the work environment is going to be in 10 years, and not only think about what will happen in the next 12 months.
Maureen?
Yeah, I wanted to weigh in a little bit on that one. So I'm not one of the young people on this panel, so I have one in traditional higher ed and another one about to head to traditional higher ed. So I am still a believer in traditional higher ed. But one of the things I think is important about it is the idea of a broad education, because what I see is sort of people need to not just be trained for a specific skill. They need to sort of have a bigger view of how things fit together and what works, because they don't need to just know how to do a job. They also need to know how to advocate for themselves, and they need to know sort of, sort of how to understand kind of why things are being shaped the way they are, and be able to reimagine them. Particularly, as technology is changing and opportunities change, we need to have people who are agile thinkers who can imagine solutions that work better. So I guess I feel that there's still an important role for broad, kind of almost liberal arts based education. But the other thing I would say is I think that in our questions on sort of technology skills, how do workers sort of adapt, I think I have worked for decades in, what are the skill training solutions and how do we sort of make them accessible to different kinds of people in different kinds of places and for different kinds of industries, et cetera. I am a huge believer of the importance in providing those kinds of opportunities, but I think we over rely on them a bit, because we need to not only think about sort of these individualistic, how do we kind of help workers get skills sorts of things, but we also need to think about what are the systemic incentives that encourage companies to create better jobs or worse jobs, right? And that is a really different question than sort of what kinds of skills do people have. And so again, it's one of those things like, I don't want technology to distract us from focusing on job quality and equity. I don't want education to distract us from focusing on job quality and equity, because those aren't the sole drivers of it. And I think we really need to think about it. And I will just say, I, for one, am very glad we have a lawyer on the panel talking about sort of the legal and regulatory framework, because those are huge incentives that really drive business behavior and business models and business strategies, and ultimately have a profound impact on the shape of the quality of jobs.
Brilliant. Well, folks, we're about at the end of time, so we'll just do a wrap-up question here, which is that you're waving a magic wand. You're all presidents, prime ministers. What is one recommendation you have for policymakers with respect to ensuring that the work of the future of work, or some other word we'd like to use to describe it, is higher quality than the work we have today? Just one sentence wrap up from the panel. And maybe we'll start with Letty.
I would say make lifelong learning a habit. We have to use behavioral economics to nudge people and make lifelong learning a habit.
Brilliant. Jeremiah.
I think it's a strong sense of agency, which we really need. This is not something, as Letty has said, that's happening in the future. This is something that's happening now. AI is not going to come for our jobs, but it's going to do a lot to the quality of those jobs. And we need to have that sense of agency today in order to ensure we get the benefit of it.
Audrey.
I would say to governments, to policymakers, that they need to plan for this, that it's not a moment in time transition, it's a process, and they need to plan comprehensively at the highest level of government, working across disciplines to prepare the labor force for the future, and that requires strategy and planning and intention behind that. So, thanks.
And Maureen.
I think we need to make job quality a goal and measure it and hold ourselves accountable for it. I think for too long, we've had policies that are designed to encourage work or to fix workers, but not designed to encourage work to pay or to fix work. And I think we need to start having more measures that sort of look at what is the quality of the jobs, what do we want the quality of the jobs to be, and how do we get from here to there? We have a lot of tools, everything from regulatory to procurement incentives to wage and hour regulation. We have a lot of tools that can improve the quality of jobs, but we need to start making that a goal and organizing them to get to that goal.
Brilliant closing comments there from our panel. There you have it, folks. Job quality equity in the context of automation augmentation. I'd like to thank our panel for a great discussion, our audience members for tuning in, both here and on our live streams, or many live streams, and of course would love to thank my wonderful colleague and partner in crime, Danny Ryan at the OECD, and his colleague Amanda for their support organizing this session. Thanks very much for joining, and we look forward to continuing this conversation with you all in the future.
Thank you so much, everyone. It's been a real pleasure. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.